ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ 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 ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ। ਬਾਣੀ ਸਤਿਨੇ ਕੀ ਰਾਗ ਬਿਲਾਵਲ। ਇੱਕੋ ਓੰਕਾਰ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਪ੍ਰਸਾਦ। ਨਿਪ ਕੰਨਿਆ ਕੇ ਕਾਰਨ ਇਕ ਭਇਆ ਭੇਖ ਤਾਰੀ। ਕਾਮਾਰਥੀ ਸੋ ਆਰਥੀ ਵਾਕੀ ਪੈਜ ਸਵਾਰੀ। तब गुण कहाँ जगत बुरा जो कर्म न नासै। सिंह सरन कत जाइयै जो जम्बक ग्रासै। एक बूंद जल कारणे चात्रिक दुख पावै। प्राण गए सागर मिलै पुन काम न आवै। प्राण जो था के फिर नहीं कैसे बिरमावो। बूढ़ मुए नौका मिलै कहाँ काहे चढ़ावो। मैं नाही कछ हो नहीं किछ आहे न मोरा। अवसर लज्जा राख लिहो सदना जन तोरा। मैं नाही कछ हो नहीं किछ आहे न मोरा। अवसर लज्जा राख लिहो सदना जन तोरा। मैं प्रेम न चाख्या मेरे प्यारे आओ करे। मन तृष्णा ना बोझी मेरे प्यारे नित आस करे। तो सोना नाथ नमो शरनाथ। तो सोना नाथ अनाथ नमो सर। तो सोना दानी ना मोसो भिखारी। मोसो न दीन दयाल न तो सर। मोसो अज्ञान न तो सो बिचारी। मोसो न पतित न पावन तो सर। मोसो बिकारी न तो सो उपकारी। मेरे है अब गुण तू गुण सागर। जात रसातन ओट तिहारी। मेरे है अब गुण तू गुण सागर। जात रसातल ओट तिहारी। ओट तिहारी। वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह। Welcome to the seventh session now, on the seventh session, second last session of this specific book club. We're going through Professor Poon Singh's Spirit of Oriental Poetry, a bit of an old text written in the early 1900s. Again, the context behind this book, we always have to explain this because it's not a book that was initially meant for Sikhs. This book was actually meant for people like people living in the West. So people living in the West in the early 1900s. And so there's the intent is to kind of share them the taste of spirituality in the East, right? That which we might not be familiar with. Us living in the West, we're very familiar with the background that comes from, you could say, the Abrahamic faiths. So like Christianity, Judaism are like on the main front of like all of our culture. It's in the background generally. There's other cultures that have existed in places in the West, but they've kind of been overtaken by the Western form of thinking. And so Professor Boon Singh writes a book in critique of a lot of the Western writing, but as well as sharing the goods and the bad sides of all different I guess poetry and the way to look at the world, right? So again, we start off the first session just going over the life of Professor Boon Singh, starting off in India and then getting a scholarship to learn in Tokyo, Japan. So they're I guess shown some sort of content that's outside of their genuine domain of understanding, which was the Indian tradition, or even seeing the British's way of learning and that type of education when they went to Japan. it was quite different than that. And so that kind of broke them out of that general type of sphere of seeing life as just their culture and being limited to just that. And so that thing that they kept with them made them attached to something that made them into a Buddhist monk. Then they turned into Vedanti. They went to they became a sannyasi of a Hindu tradition, right? And then they even let go of that when they came into the Sharan of a Gursikh, when they came into the Sangat of Bhai Veer Singh, right, who's pictured in that picture there. So that great love that he was looking for, he finally found with these Gursikhs, and his dedication, to Sikhi is what kind of led him, and why he's writing this book to begin with, is to kind of get everyone else who's kind of stuck in those very hard, fast compartments of their life, and kind of show that spirituality or life isn't limited to these, right? So even breaking our limited way of thinking of maybe just our culture and the stuff that are around us, it's allowing us to go further than that. It's allowing us to get to this space where we're all looking for our beloved, no matter what culture, what tradition we're from. We're all trying to develop this love, this divine love within us, right? And so that's what we did in the second session, how we see this divine love between yourself and having this individual relationship between yourself as well as Waheguru, God, Ram, Khuda, whatever tradition you're coming from, that is connected there, right? That importance of that divine relationship is key, right? And we see in Gurbani, as well as multiple other different poetry of different traditions, you see that relationship being explained as if it's between a husband and a wife, right? And we are like the bride, the soul bride, as we get translated the Sohagan and these types of ways within Gurbani, Kamani, Ayani Bali, like all these different terms that are about getting to the Saha, the Pir, the beloved, the husband, all these different names, right? So that's what we explored in the second session. And then the third session, we actually had or Professor Poon Singh go through all of the different poetries of the world and kind of give us a background, like a developing a lens, right? So if we were to walk into this world, how do we see it, regardless of whatever film we may watch, whatever book we may read, whatever, say, video game we may play, we might be scrolling TikTok, we might be scrolling through Reels. How do we develop that lens, right? And they kept on saying that wherever there's divine remembrance, and again, this is a statement that rings true with Gurbani as well. Gurbani is telling us that like wherever we remember Vaheguru, wherever we remember Vaheguru, the divine, that place is beautiful, right? That blessed is that place where we sing the praises of Vaheguru, and that we do vichar of the qualities of Vaheguru. So there's many films, there's many movies, there's many things that kind of go in, and sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're very straightforward, and they're present there, right? So he takes up Shakespeare, he goes through all these different poets that have been divinely inspired, right? People who we would call almost like saintly, right? So he goes through the Persian tradition, he goes through the Japanese tradition, he goes through South Asia as it is, because that's the main perspective that's being shared with, but also Christian writers like Carlyle, Walt Whitman, and how they have some sort of, there's a divine flavor in there, because it's allowing us to connect to something more deeper than this physical world, right? So that's what was so beautifully put in the third session. In the fourth session, we looked at the disciple poetry, that poetry that was shared by the Sikhs towards Guru Sahib, or that perspective. So in Sufi tradition, there's the Murshid and the Murid. You have like the spiritual teacher and then the student, right? But for a Sikh, it's way more than that. There's no relationship like that of a Sikh and their Guru. It's almost like, by Gurdas Ji writes, and it's mentioned in this section as well, that all the different love stories of the world, whether it be apne Heer Ranja, Sasi Punnu, all these different examples are traditionally shared within India, right? But also within the Western sphere, like Romeo Juliet. I can't think of any more. Laila Majnun. That's somewhere that's in the Middle East where it originated from. But those relationships, those stories are nothing in comparison to that of a Sikh and the Guru, right? Because people physically, when there's a physical love, it can never get to a point where there's no difference, there's no separation. There's still a separate one person in that relationship and another person in that relationship, right? So with the Sikh and the Guru, it's a point that even when the body is finished, then still the Sikhti Surti, that merging starts to happen, that divine union happens, which is no longer physical, it's gone to another realm, right? There's no difference between the Sikh and their Guru. And so that relationship is portrayed by Guru Sahib themselves, even for Gurbani. Guru Arjan Dev Ji, when they gave that Gurta Gaddi, rather when they compiled all of Ad Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, it wasn't given Gurta Gaddi at that time. Even still, at that point, they laid on the ground and they gave the Singhas and they gave the seat to Guru Granth Sahib Ji, or the Gurbani, right? That this divine word, right? And we went through that, and then even Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj properly formalized and gave the Gurta Gaddi then to Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, our current and 11th Guru, right? The fifth session looked at poetry and looked at starting to define things by genres. Poetry is separated in genre. You can read love poetry. You can read poetry that can bring you fear, like something that's scary. You can read something that will give you courage, right? They're biras. So we went through all these different types of things, but the specific section was focused on shingaras, which is looking at like the beauty of the world. And looking at the beauty of the world, but not in a way where we're developing our ego or we're headed towards lust or emotional attachment, but in a way that brings that beauty of the world, the beauty of nature, the natural beauty, and seeing that in a way that reminds us of this divine relationship. It's again the same concepts that were brought up in the third session, but then specified, meaning it's like now you're going more specific, right? Like where there's an ocean, then there's a river, and then the river is a stream. So you're getting more specific into these different spheres of poetry that Professor Poon Singh is doing. Then, since we've looked at all these things very beautifully, because Professor Poon Singh gives examples from other religions, other traditions, whether it's Islam, whether it's within like the the Vaishnav tradition. So they go into this Rasa Leela. Rasa Leela is this this story between the union of Radha and Sri Krishna ji, and they describe it in a way that how we should have the same relationship with Vaheguru, right? So although the nature, again, if you weren't here last time, we went over this in very specific depth, so you may get confused if you hear it now, but this idea of even there's no place that doesn't have Vaheguru there. And we went over this story of or rather this riddle, where we may have a dirty way of thinking. We may have a very a way that we misperceive things. Like, for example, if someone were to say a very bland statement, someone may make a dirty joke out of it, even though that wasn't the intent behind it. But the person's drishti, yada drishti tada srishti, that the way that someone perceives the world, that's how they're going to accept it, right? So in the Sri Krishna ji, they talk about in that Rasa Leela about like the union of the Gopiya with Sri Krishna ji. So in all the Gopiya, if you look on a spiritual level, they represent the Gyan Indriya, so the senses. So we want to attach the senses towards Vaheguru, right? So whether it's the sense of smell, they were smelling Sri Krishna ji, they were touching Sri Krishna ji, they were seeing Sri Krishna ji and beholding that and making that attach back to something more divine. And the same thing we're doing, but with Guru Sahib, right? With our divine beloved, our Ishtadev, Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, of the Guru Khalsa Panth Sahib Ji, all the 10 Guru Sahiban within Sikhi. So we looked at that quite beautifully, but it got to a point where there is some stuff that was explained in a very explicit and sensual manner, right? So for us, for the average person, we think like, why are you getting to this type of sphere? And then we looked at that example in Gurbani about the sage, about the bed of the sick and their beloved, right? And we're taking that physical thing, but we're using our mind and attaching it to something more larger than that, right? So the union is not a physical union that we have with Guru Sahib, it's something that's spiritual and it's something that transcends this existence. So again, that's something that you may want to look at even more and do a dasta to Guru Sahib to understand that. Again, it's a quite complicated subject. I think we did go through it quite smoothly last week, but if anyone is joining after a while, then they may be a bit confused. So there's one side where there's this extreme union. Today's session is going to look at something about the opposite, extreme separation. So this quote here is by like a Christian writer. It's like there is something within us, a longing, a yearning. There's a pull within us that makes us want to connect to something. And Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, who we're going to start off the session with, tell us in Vairaag Sahib, I've probably mentioned this over 100 times, probably once per session. But Guru Sahib says in Vairaag Sahib, Pei Prapta Manak Devriya Govind Milan Teri Bariya. Avar Kaj Tera Kitana Kam and Sad Samad Paj Kevalna. That you're given this human body to connect with the divine, right? There's no other purpose behind it. Go and sit in the Sad Sangat and focus on the Naam. Whether it's Naam Simran, Katha, Kirtan, Vichar, whether you're listening to Kirtan, whether you're listening to Katha, you're bringing the divine into your mind, that concentration. That's the point of this human life. So this is the things that we're going to focus on today. And just this Vairaag, we're going to open up what this Vairaag really looks like. It may be a term you might have heard before, but we're going to go into this in a better understanding, both in like a poetic way, but also in a spiritual way, in a way that can help us clear some questions up, because sometimes people may have feelings when they start walking on this path of spirituality, and sometimes it's not a good feeling. It may be something that's painful, but there's even purpose behind those, right? And that's what this entire Vairag is. It's not something you run away from, but it's something we recognize and make use of the most. So as promised, Das did mention there's a couple of Gursikhs that wanted Das to explain Gyotanka, I guess the beginning of the context towards the Shabad that we had sung in previously for the Mangal, right? So begging Maharaj. So all the Shabads that Das had recited, they all have to do with like connecting to Maharaj, begging Maharaj for both love, but also the strength to continually walk on this path. So Chaubale Mahalla Panjawan. This is a Shabad that Das had recited before a few times. So we're going to go over this, and it's all about love, right? So again, this entire section is about Vairag and connecting to Maharaj in this way. But before that, again, this is about drawing our attention, but drawing um, our our feelings as well, right? Sometimes we're at pain, right? But even within these pains, we can make a connection. So we think of the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, because we're speaking about the Shabad that they had recited. But even thinking about their Shahidi, and I'll give a little just brief context towards it. Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj was meant to sit on a tatti tavi, meaning a hot plate, which is what they're depicted over here as sitting upon. They had hot sand poured over their body. Imagine that hot plate has fire underneath it. And they were tortured, right? And they're tortured and made to face these excruciating conditions. In the month of June, in the end of May this year, marks the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj. And the Gursikhs remember. But even that remembrance, when we remember the Shahidi, it brings us into such a deep state of contemplation. So those conditions we think of, and the emperor at that time, Emperor Jahangir, had ordered for this to have happened under the trickery of Chandu, right? Chandu and Priti Chand were against Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, and so this was the condition here. So we remember, like as if Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj is giving Shahidi in front of us right now. So I'm going to be reciting something called Shahidi Jap, which is remembrance of Shahidi essentially. So I'm going to say a statement which is just literally picturing Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj right now in front of us, moment by moment, giving Shahidi, right? So I'll say it in Punjabi as well as in English. Vaheguru, 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 Vaheguru. ਧੰਨ ਹਨ ਧੰਨ ਹਨ ਧੰਨ ਹਨ ਪਰਮ ਪੂਜਨੀਕ ਸੱਚੇ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਧੰਨ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਹੁਣ ਧੰਨ ਧੰਨ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਉਬਲਦੀ ਦੇਗ 'ਚ ਚੌਂਕੜਾ ਲਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ blessed ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ is Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj. They are Pratakhar, they are the form of Vaheguru with us present at all times. They're made to sit in a boiling cauldron. That boiling cauldron is peeling their skin. It is torturing them, excruciating pain. ਹੁਣ ਤਤੀ ਤਵੀ ਤੇ ਬੈਠ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ. After this, they're made to sit on a hot burning plate. ਹੁਣ ਮੱਚਦਾ ਮੱਚਦਾ ਰੇਤਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਮ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਪਰਮ ਪੂਜਨੀਕ ਸੱਚੇ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਧੰਨ ਧੰਨ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਪਰਮ ਪਵਿੱਤਰ ਸੀਸ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਪਵਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ. On Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj's blessed, beautiful, kind, benevolent head is hot sand being poured. That which had blessed us with Gurbani, that which had done the Odad, which had saved so many of the people suffering in this world, Maharaj is taking that suffering upon themselves, upon their head. ਹੁਣ ਤਤੀ ਤਵੀ ਤੇ ਖੜ ਰਹੇ ਹਨ. Now Maharaj is standing upon that hot plate. all this torture has happened. You could imagine blisters upon blisters. That hot sand is tearing open previous wounds. There's no words as to how Maharaj is going through this. We're the humans that can't go through this pain. We'd be screaming. But Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj is saying, Tera kiya meetha lagya, har naam padarth nanak mangya. Maharaj is taking this pain upon their bodies. And they're saying, Vaheguru's hukam is sweet to us. Regardless of the situation we go through, all we should ask for is the Naam of Vaheguru, of this divine name, as this is the true treasure of this life. All the other pleasures and pains are coming and going. But this Naam, people, all these beings, all these beings are thirsting for this Naam. It's the way to salvation, it's the way to liberation, it's the way of fulfilling your life, fulfilling that void, filling that void in your heart. Maharaj is saying that, Maharaj is showing that Vaheguru is themselves coming down in Parameshwar's form. They're taking on this body and they're going through this pain, this excruciating pain themselves to teach us that this is the direction, this is the attitude we take towards the hardships in our lives. That Maharaj's hukam is sweet, and regardless of what happens, no longer attached to the pleasures and pains. We're attached to that divine ultimate nectar, the sweetness that's gonna bring us peace at all times. The one that we say, Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Pani Sarbat Da Pala. That we ask for that name, which brings us into the highest states possible. Always, every other pleasure always drops down and falls down, and it starts to wear off. But Namda Rasya, the name of that taste of Ras, of the taste of Naam, will always continue. We think of that Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj and the Sakhi connected to them. There's a story of these really poor, these poor workers. These poor workers were paying off debts by working for you could say a shopman, a trader, someone who had like their own shop, right? And their name were Samman and Nusan, their father and son. Samman and Nusan, they had gone to the shop owner. They essentially had earned a lot of money, and they would use those earnings to pay off their day-to-day their day-to-day bills and stuff like that. Anything that was left over, they actually asked their boss that please keep this money, right? Because people who were rich at that time, they're able to essentially keep that money safe because they had the means to do that, right? So banking and stuff like that wasn't as we know it today. So they told their boss to keep that money safe. And then there came a time when they heard that Guru Arjan Dev Ji was coming around. They went to have the darshan of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and then they did a benti to Guru Arjan Dev Ji. After seeing Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, they said, Maharaj, we have this desire within us. After seeing this langar, they wanted to feed Guru Sahib. They wanted to do seva of Guru Sahib and do a langar seva, but they were really poor. But they said, you know what? All of the earnings that we had, they had 500 rupees. Let's take all of that and have langar with it. Let's use it towards the seva of Guru Sahib and the Gursikhs. And so they went to their boss and said, can we have our 500 rupees back? And the boss said, yeah, for sure. It's your treasure. I've just been holding it for you. Yeah, I'll give it to you. Just come later on today and I'll give it to you all. And so at that time, when they had asked their boss, they had went afterwards to the shops and told them, like, please start making some mithai, please start making some sweets. Please, they had already made the orders, right? But then someone came that was connected to Chandu. Chandu was a Gurukar da Dokhi, right? Meaning someone who had evil intentions towards Guru Sahib. And it's out of ignorance, right? Maharaj api khelna chaunde hai. The Maharaj themselves are making these things happen. We may have a negative attitude towards people who do evil things, but Maharaj is making them do that themselves. In those states, Maharaj is the person that was a representative of Chandu, he had warned the shopkeeper. He's like, if Chandu finds out that you're gonna give them money for langar, he's gonna make you suffer. You're gonna have to go through all this punishment. You're gonna have to go to court because Chandu was a representative of Jahangir, the royal courts. Imagine wherever you are, if you're in Canada, United States, wherever in the world, or UK, imagine if the government had sent a worker saying like you shouldn't do what you want because the government's gonna come after you. It's a big deal. You get scared, right? So when that shopkeeper, he said that like I can't give you the money right now, right? He can't because he's fearing for his life. He told the person originally that you know what, it's their money. Why should I keep it? And because he scared him, he stopped doing it. So what Saman and Musan they had thought up was like, okay, look, it's our money. We're not stealing it if it rightfully belonged to us. So they went in the middle of the night and they're like, okay, we're gonna go and take our money, the 500 rupees that we had saved up, and we're not gonna take anything more than that, but we need to make sure this is carried out. So they go in the middle of the night, and so what they do is because they're not, they didn't ask and just like walk into the shop. They had gone into like the underneath the roof. There was like a hole in the roof, right? And there's an area between the roof and like you could say the main building, right? They say in the Utanka and like where it's written in Gurumukhi, they called it a mog. I don't know how to translate that into English, but just imagine it to be a hole underneath the roof. And so they had gone and they had went through they went one of Saman and Musan went there, the son, he had stuck his head through and was able to get the 500 rupees, right? So he was able to get the 500 rupees. He gave them to his father, and then what had happened was his head got stuck. So because it wasn't a place he was naturally supposed to like, just get into, he kind of like squeezed in and then was to take that money and then we're just gonna leave. So they were delighted that they're able to get the money out that rightfully belonged to them, but then they got stuck in that position. And so what the son had said was, please, we can't, I won't be stuck. We can't use tools to go and open up this thing because people are gonna wake, right? People are gonna wake up as a result, and we don't want to look like we're joy. We don't want to look like we're you could say thieves, right? Especially Gursikhs. They're like, we don't want to bring any bad name to the Guru's house because we're Gursikhs, right? Those who are attached to Guru Sahib, they're like, we don't want to create any bad name for Guru Sahib that like, oh, Gursikh chori kar diya. Because even if people don't know the the backstory, they're still gonna think that like, oh, someone's breaking into a shop and they're stealing money. So what the son had said was like, please cut off my head. They had so much respect for Guru Sahib that they didn't want to even potentially make them badnaam, make them look bad. So he said, cut off my head. The father said, no, come on, like we can't, I shouldn't have to cut your head off in order to do this. But he told him, he's like, please, there's not enough time. Because at that moment, the sun was coming to rise in a few, like hours as well. So they're kind of stuck. They didn't really have any other option. And then he said, just cut off my head and then take the head with you so they don't like people will see the body but they won't be able to recognize who it belonged to. So the father had brought the head and as well as the 500 coins and then paid the people that were working, right? So the father was in a really bad position, and the shopkeeper in the morning, when he saw this, he saw a dead body. He's like, okay, well, someone's gonna blame the murder on me. So and he's like, you know what, I probably deserve this. He said I deserve this because I wasn't able to give someone in Muslim their money. So he went and gave 500 coins towards someone in Musan, and not realizing that like they had already taken it, right? So he gave 500 additional more. And so he felt bad in the situation that like, that this is my karma. I've got my just deserved. And after that, so the langar is then made, and then Maharaj is saying to the father, he's saying, where's your son? Right? Maharaj Jani Jani, Maharaj knows what actually had happened. And they say, Maharaj, he's not here right now. Maharaj says, go get him, right? And he's like, oh, sutta pe aaya. And then Maharaj says, then go wake him up. And then almost crying, he's saying, my son, he says, my son has gone to a place where I can no longer wake him up. Maharaj, it's a place where only you can wake him up. And then Maharaj, recognizing the love of their Gursikhs, that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for Guru Sahib, then called him, and they called for someone at the time, for Musan. There's a bit of confusion historically as to who was the father and who was the son, but they called the son and they called him by his name. And in that way, after the shopkeeper had taken, had given the money, he had asked for, the father to take the body away from the shop as well. So he had done that. So meaning the body and the head were in one place. And so ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਿਰ ਜੋੜਤਾ ਸੀ ਵਾਪਸ Guru Sahib ਨੇ. Guru Sahib, recognizing the love of their Gursikhs, they had brought their head together and they made him come back to life, right? Because he wasn't meant to die in the beginning, right? He wasn't meant to die in the first place. Those who are already meant to die, ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਕਰਮ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੋ ਗਏ, then those people are at a place of no return, right? But Maharaj is recognizing these Gursikhs' love, and they had many more karam in their lives, right? And that's where the Shabad came. Then Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, the same one, same Guru Sahib who gave us Shahidi, the same one who recognized the love of these Gursikh, the same son of Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj. Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj was known to always be crying. That's why even in the Shabad of, the picture, you'll see where it says Das Jaskaran Singh. In Das's secondary account that's in the session, there's pictures of Guru Ramdas Ji Maharaj's tears falling because they're known to be crying their entire life. Not crying in dukh of this world, but crying in this divine love. There's no words to kind of put this. That these eyes are filled with this Amrit, and the Amrit is overflowing, this nectar, this immortal nectar, and they're outflowing through this bliss, and they're falling down the cheeks. And many people refer to these like as these tears are no longer tears, but they're flowers, they're flower petals that are falling out. And that's what you see in that painting there. But the Shabad, what Guru Maharaj is saying, we'll go through it very basically, but they're saying, Samman jo is prem ki, dam kya hoti saat, Ravan hote so rank nahe, jinser deen kaat. So those 500 rupees, the 500 coins that they had saved up, they had given that to Guru Sahib. And like that, those 500 rupees were worth one head, right? And Maharaj is saying that even giving up one head is not enough, or one head cannot be valued for 500 coins. Jada premya, that love for Guru Sahib, is something that cannot be a value can be placed on it, right? Some Gursikhs read this Shabad, the Chaubole, you can find it in a lot of Gurbani apps, as part of their Nityanim, as their daily Gurbani. And they say, Ravan hote so rankan hai, jin se din ne kaat, because anyone who knows the story of Sri Ramchandra Ji and Ravan is known to be a 10-headed demon, right? So he had all 10 of his heads cut off, right? So if he had 10 heads and he offered those, and those weren't enough, so think that you can't place a value on that love for Guru Sahib, because a head is not even enough. Some people, after they even complete this chakkar of life, after they complete this life cycle, they actually asked for Guru Sahib, that Maharaj, I want to spend, maybe even if you do hukam, if you command me, I can take on another life, as long as it means I'm remembering you. This is the type of love that they have. Ravan hote so rankan hai, jin se din ne kaat, that, Ravan was also quite rich as well. And he couldn't buy this love, right? He had all these heads cut off, but he still couldn't attain that love. Preet prem tan khach rahya, beechna rai ho, charan kamal man vedyo, bhujan swarat sanjo. That this body is drenched in this love. It's all, the state of love is so beautiful that there's no body left anymore. At the end of the Shabad, it's not here, but it goes over this idea of being magan. Magan means intoxicated in this love. Sudhana simrat ang, that I cannot feel my body anymore. There's no body anymore. It's just this divine feeling. Vaheguru is pervading everywhere. There's no I and you. There's no me and Vaheguru. There's no words that can no longer put these feelings into, not even feeling, the experience, the existence. It's like you've connected, that wall of ego has collapsed, and it's just the bliss of Vaheguru. That's all there is in these states. So that can't be explained, nor can be put into this idea of giving up heads, of giving up 500 coins and doing all this stuff. Sagaris mer udyan ban navkhand basada param, musan prem piram kya gano ek kar karam. That I can do so much in this world, but this love still cannot be put into words, right? I can do so much. I can cross over 1,000 oceans, right? Although we have only 7 oceans within this, but say if there's many more, I would cross them over and over again just to find you, Maharaj. All these forests, all these jungles were very dangerous, knowing that your life is going to be in danger. All the continents, every type of world, maybe planets, keep going and going and going to find you, Vaheguru, to be in this connection. Musan maskar prem ki, rahiso jo ambar chhaaye, beete bande kamal mein hai, pagre rahe lapataye. That this love spreads everywhere. It spreads just like the sky. The sky covers all of this earth, like around it. In the same way, whether it's the night sky, which is covered with all of the space, it permeates every part of this world. But Utthavi, even at those points, my mind is focused onto Guru Sahib, just like a bee gets caught up in a lotus flower. The bee is so intoxicated with the nectar within that flower that it becomes just intoxicated. Again, it just goes into a state where the bee is no longer a bee anymore. It's just the one that's experiencing that nectar. In that same way, we no longer remain of the body and the mind. We just become that part of Vaheguru. So we won't go through the entire Shabad. This isn't even the full Shabad. It takes 2 minutes to do the full Ucharan of it. But again, it'll go into a different aspect if we start to break that down. But that's the state of union, and like it brings the heart towards somewhere, right? So when you're separated from that state, that's all of what Vairag is. And so this section, I don't want to, we're already almost at 3:48. Again, try and go through this at a very manageable rate. But yeah, that's a huge important thing for us to look at. Even the Shabad, the Utarnika behind it, thinking about Guru Sahib Shaheed, all these things really attach our emotions, really attach our minds towards Guru Sahib really quick. So what exactly is Vairag? Or we hear Vairag. There's multiple terms of saying it. In Sanskrit, like you have Vairagya, you have Vairag. They're all the same thing, right? Just different local dialects to describe it. And what it is detachment or dispassion. So detachment as in, if you're in this state where, you're attached, that means that, you wake up thinking about like what I'm going to have for breakfast. Who am I going to meet today? You think about your ego, your I self, saying like, what are things that are going to bring myself pleasure, right? Is it going to be, seeing my partner? Is it going to be seeing my friends? Is it going to be by watching my favorite movie? Is it going to be by all these different things, like all these worldly pleasures, right? When you're detached from those, what ends up happening is that you no longer seek happiness there. You no longer can even feel happiness there. So there's certain events, certain things that will make us start to feel this way, and they break us off from the world. So like Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji Maharaj says in Slok Mahalla Nawa, again in Slok Mahalla Nawa, the entire Gurbani, the entire Shabads are about Vairag. They're about disconnecting us from the world and attaching us to something permanent. Where Maharaj says at the end, Naam Raheo, Sadhu Raheo Guru Govind, that what remains at the end is the Naam, right? The one thing that connects us within this world to Guru Sahib. Oh, Hamesha Rehanda, that always stays, always there, the name, right? Or the connections to Guru Sahib. Sadhu Raheo, those who are in the physical body that connect their mind towards Guru Sahib, they remain as well. Not their physical body, but only the surti jurti. And the Guru Sahib and Vaheguru themselves remain. So here Maharaj says, Jai Bhikya Sagalita Ji Liope Bairag. Those people that have let go of all of the papun, meaning all the karma, they've let go of all these things within this world. And they take on the robes, the physical wear of Bairag, right? Meaning they now wear the clothes of detachment. They have good destiny, they have a good fortune, meaning they have a good life if they have these types of things. And what does that look like? It means someone, whether they wake up and they have a gourmet lunch or they have really simple food, they're unaffected by it. Whether they wear very fancy clothes or they wear very simple clothes, they're unaffected by it. That's a state of Vairag. Whether it's they drive a huge like a very like $1 million car, or they drive just a simple car that gets them from point A to point B, that dispassion, that detachment, meaning not indulging into the world. Very naturally, these things are created through Vairag, right? And you may want to reach these states where you get to this place, but it's through Maharaj's hukum. So we often do a lot of Gursikhs will do Ardasna, we'll do these begging to Guru Granth Sahib Ji that please make me feel this Vairag. And it's not an easy path, right? It's not something that it's very easy to do. So we'll explain that. We'll explain that, go through these positive feelings and these negative feelings. And I wouldn't say negative. You realize that even Vairag is a positive feeling within it, right? So just one way, Professor Poon Singh, again, if you read this section, they explain it next. So they explain as Vairagam. Again, this is another, depending on what dialect you're using. Like if you go more towards the south, you'll hear Vairagam and these terms used. Vairagam is our greatest preparation for serene contemplation. The thorn of ignorance that has pierced our mind can only be taken out by another thorn of Vairag, an error to be corrected by another error. It is a sadness that overwhelms us when we aim our arrow at a stage and kill a man. Ignorance compels us to surrender our all, to win it back in love. We die to live. Lord Buddha, right? They're referring to Gautam Siddharth or Siddharth Gautam. Lord Buddha gave himself up to pain till the time that until under the Bodhi tree, right, which is how they attained enlightenment, the illumination came and all was like. It is ignorance that constitutes our pain. We are the makers of our own destiny. So there's a question that was asked right here. What is the difference between Chardikala and Vairag? We have to get this out of our minds, right? That physical, or rather worldly happiness is eternal happiness. Some people may confuse Chardikala for, when I'm in a good state, when I'm happy. That's not happiness. Maharaj says, Dukh daru sukh rog pe ja sukh tam na hui. This again, the Rara side. Dukh, meaning suffering, is our medicine. So, and how does that work? Dukh daru sukh rog pe. The pleasures, the worldly pleasures, are actually the diseases. Why are they diseases? Is because in those states, we are so filled with ourselves. We're so filled with our own pleasure, with our own ego, that it's not the eternal pleasure. Because these are limited to our bodies, they are limited to our minds, it's limited to our perceptions of the world. So if someone, for example, is enjoying lust, I'm just giving an example. In those states, they may think that, oh, this is a great feeling, this is Chardikala. No, it's not. In those states, that's called, Gurbani says, Ihabisya, that this is a poison. And they say that it's a sweet poison, right? So it may seem sweet on the outside, but what it's doing, it's continually bringing us towards the ego and continually looking for our own pleasures, right? So what Vairag is then, is something that will come and break this cycle, right? Like I was just speaking to a Virji, like literally before this session, we went to a coffee shop and we're just discussing some things. He was sharing some moments in his life. He had his father-in-law pass away in India, and he's sharing how great of a person he was, and because his family was like his father-in-law was from Amritsar, he said that it was very tough because he was quite close with his father-in-law, and he said that he reached a state where he no longer felt, and that usually happens in events like this when you have someone pass away. The entire ground beneath you is like shaken, right? You can no longer enjoy the things that you like to enjoy. It's like the same things, like your morning routines. Like I like to drink my cup of tea, like that type of stuff, or like I like to have this for breakfast and I enjoy it as part of my day. Those things are completely thrown out of your world, and you no longer feel like these things can give you pleasure anymore because they can't. This is that one thing will show you that truly, that those things that you had expectations for to bring you pleasure, they no longer last, and these pleasures aren't eternal. So that Vairag, that state, and then he said, I felt like doing nothing. He's like, because he was in Sri Amritsar side, he's like, all my mind wanted to do was just run away. And where did he run to? He said he ran to Darbar Sahib. He went to Santokh Sahib, all the different Gurdwara in there. And I was just like, this is so beautiful. I'm so happy that you shared this with me, because I can bring it up literally in this session. What ends up happening is this: your mind is continually stuck in cycles of pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain over and over again, and we won't stop it. Our mind is so gentle, our mind is so wavering, it goes through those things over and over again. But there will be those events in our life, those things that happen in our life, that will completely wipe those out and force you to deal with those things that we've been avoiding, force you to look towards something larger that will actually fulfill you. And these are these states of Vairag. These are these causes, these events of Vairag, and everything kind of puts back here together. When you go over Vairag over and over again, there'll be one point where you'll eventually stop running towards the world. And so Chardikala is then the attachment for the Sada Sukh, the true eternal peace. So when someone is broken, imagine it's like this. Someone who is attached to the world, this is again the example of the lotus flower. Maya, all of this Maya is represented by Lakshmi, and Lakshmi is said to be an upside down flower, right? The upside down flower is facing the entire world, right? And what Maharaj is doing is they take that Lakshmi and turn it upside down. And so you're on top of the water instead of facing all of this entire world, right? People have used this example in other ways, meaning like Lakshmi is like this, and Guru Sahib drops it down like this as well. There's different examples, but what it is, it's saying that this entire Maya, this creation, we've put it up on a pedestal. And what Maharaj is doing by taking us into a state of Vairag is showing us the real nature of it, that it is temporary and it's not our main purpose in this life, right? And is bringing us to a state where we can be on top of the muddy waters in which the lotus sits on and can stay in that eternal peace, right? The Chardi Kala doesn't come from, having like food, having a successful career, having all these things. That's Chardi Kala doesn't exist in there. Those are places of Tandi Kala. Because Chardi Kala is a state where it never drops down, meaning like it's a spiritual state that keeps rising. It's not referring to your mood. Your mood is not referring to a mood that continually goes up. It goes towards spiritual progress. It's like your mind is no longer going back into cycles that are very short cycles of back and forth, pain and pleasure, pain and pleasure. What it'll be is like a long time of detachment. And then you attach your mind towards the sadasuk, the eternal peace. Sometimes the mind then gets caught back up into the world. And then it gets broken off again. But even for a longer time, then you slowly break off from the world. It's not something that happens all of a sudden, but you start to break off, and replace it with divine connection over and over again, till one point it'll never break off and go towards the world again. So we'll explain that and what that's actually called in this session as well. So this example we see here, Professor Poon Singh, before they introduce the story of Rajapar Thariji and Pingala, they refer to the story of the king and the Gujari. The Gujari is a milkmaid, or referred to as a gopi as well, multiple different names for this. Gujari is usually referred to those of the Muslim background. But there was a king that came by. This is a story, again, if you read it, it was there too, but just to kind of paraphrase it, there's a king that came on an elephant, right? The king came by on an elephant and walking through a town. There's a huge procession, huge fanfare. And there's this woman, this Gujari, who's this milkmaid, carrying this pot of milk on her back or on her head, right? Whatever, I forget how it describes it. The king's procession is going by and it knocks over the milk, right? So whether it was the elephant or some of the people nearby, the milk gets dropped over and that pot breaks. When that pot breaks, that Gujari doesn't cry, right? Like the old saying, don't cry over spilled milk. That Gujari smiles. And that catches the king's attention. It's like she's going through suffering. Her entire world revolves around that milk because that's her job, right? It's, imagine if you were a tow truck driver or like whatever, I'm just giving an example, and then you go and like you're supposed to tow a vehicle over to somewhere, and that vehicle ends up like flying off your tow truck and ends up double barrel, triple barrel, roll over into like the ditch and something, and the gaddi is totaled, the vehicle is totaled, and that's like pretty much a huge deal, right? Because then that's going to put you out of work for a while. And so the Gujari milk drops down, and that king is wondering why is she smiling? And it's not like she's smiling with like ear to ear, like, oh, beautiful, my milk just dropped. She had this like, this mystical smile, like there's a mystery behind it. And the king was trying to find out. And he says to the Gujari, it's like, why are you smiling? And the Gujari says, don't worry about me. You have your own suffering that you have to worry about. Don't worry about my suffering. You continue on with your procession. And she still kind of has this smile on her. And the king is still, he doesn't, because a lot of these kings, all these people at those times, they didn't have much patience, especially kings, because they had received everything on demand. They received everything at the moment. They barely had situations where they didn't receive what they wanted. So the king is stubborn. He said, no, I want to hear this. Why? And she finally gives in and she says, look, I went through such a disturbing life. And she lists all of these things. She's like, I used to be a queen. From becoming a queen, my husband died. And then a huge disaster had happened. After a huge disaster had happened, she had rolled away into a flood. Like there's multiple, I'm changing the order of all this stuff happening. But then she's then kidnapped by like a robber, right? She says a robber king, like a Daku pretty much. And then that Daku forces her to marry with him, right? So forced marriage with her. And then forces her to bear a child as well. And so she then that king gets killed. And then in those old times, there was a practice of sati. Sati is like when the wife would then kill herself when her husband would die, right? These are things that Guru Amar Das Ji Maharaj had destroyed these practices, right? Or the Guru Sahib had uplifted the status of women in this way, status of all people, by eliminating these events. But this is a story that's told before that, right? So she was made to force to be burnt alive on top of her husband's grave, on his cremation bed. And she said she's still somehow saved from that, and she was continue living from there. She ran away there and then went through another form of suffering. And then she says, after this, I get injured somehow and then end up in the care of these farmers. And the farmers heal her and they take care of her and they bring her back to life. And in the moment where she received care, she willingly then got married to one of the farmers. And the farmers and that wife and that woman, she had tons of cows. And those cows, a lot of them died out. And it was a huge nuksan, we say huge loss had happened. And so she said, in this time, they only had one cow left. And this pot that she was bringing was from that one cow, and that cow was dying itself. So when that pot fell, that was supposed to feed her family the earnings that she was supposed to get from it. And that smile was a point of surrender. It was a point where she no longer felt that she had power, that she had any energy, that everything's going to go in my way, in the way that I want it. Right? At that moment, she accepted hukam. And that smile was a smile of letting go, a smile of acceptance of the divine will. And that's why she attained that. So sometimes these events that happen in our life, they break us off from our own ego, that I'm doing something, right? That I have power. Because Maharaj is saying that everything is within this hukam, that Guru Sahib's hukam runs everything. And these things are very important for us to know. This Vairaag, what it does is, it could be an event in our life. It could be multiple events in our life. It can be multiple things that have happened or multiple things that do. But what do? They force us to renounce ourselves or renounce our ego and to just let go and surrender. And then leave everything to Vaheguru. This is the importance of that. At first, these things might be painful because the pain doesn't come from the event itself. The pain comes from resistance. The pain comes from the ego actually dying. This Bhagat Kabir ji, they say, Kabir, जिस मरने ते जग टरै मेरा मन आनंद मरने ही ते पाया पूरन परमानंद. They're saying, Bhagat Kabir is saying, that death which the entire world is scared to die in, meaning the death of the self, the death of the ego. At that place, when the ego dies and the self is relinquished, he's saying, Mere man anand, that is what brings bliss into my mind. Marne hite paiya, that from this type of death, Puran Paramanand, completion, the Paramanand, the most ultimate bliss you want to receive in your life comes from this death. But everyone is scared of it because they've over-identified with their body, over-identified with their mind, over-identified with the things that are constantly with the mind, meaning your family, your job, your identity. Maharaj is saying, Hukum Rajai Charana, right? That comes up. And then Bhai Gurdas Ji gives a commentary towards this. They say, Hukum Rajai Charana, Aap Gavaya na Aap Janaya. That they give up themselves and they don't even recognize their own personal existence. This is what Sikhi is. This is what Maharaj is coming to. This is what Professor Puran Singh is trying to show us and is saying to us to look at these things within our own lives, but also look for these things in other ways that always bring our minds back. Again, because this goes back to poetry, it goes back to media and content. What type of content should we consume? We shouldn't consume those things that continually bring us back into the suffering. It should bring us towards things that bring us towards realization, bring us to be in a state of detachment, right? If I watch a movie like The Matrix, it tells me to get out of the Matrix, right? People use this in multiple different aspects, some for wrong purposes, but for us as Sikhs, it's like, let me get out of this mind, let me get out of this ego. Then by Jagraj Singh, who started Basics of Sikh, he actually has a commentary on this, and they have the Matrix analogy, and they did a full lecture at a university for this. So we mentioned this in some of the earlier sections. By Harman Singh have done a video on the Black Panther movie and how we can use that to connect to Sikhi. Das with Guru Sahib's Kirpa has made a video about Harry Potter and how Harry Potter's suffering as a child, being neglected by his family, not being connected to his maternal and his mother and father. Then it allows him to only detach from the world even more and recognize his role within Hogwarts and like saving the world, right? So even these things, all of these, we're using the same concepts, but be able to when we read Gurbani over and over again, it starts getting ingrained into our minds. And when we walk into this world, we start to see these things. We start to see Vairag happen, right? And this is why Professor Poon Singh then shares another story, right? And this is just what we explained here. They give the example, which Das shared the link towards the episode. They actually give like a dialogue. They explain like a play. In a play, they had written the rest of this chapter up in this story between Raja Parthariji and his wife Pingalaji. So to kind of, if you didn't get a chance to watch that episode, again, I included that just so you're able to kind of see what I'm talking about, meaning that you're able to kind of see spirituality in the world. This show, Upanishad Ganga, is like a Hindu show that kind of like highlights many different things. There's certain episodes that will kind of connect to Sikhi, certain episodes that don't. But Das had watched this episode and saw that this was heavily connected to Vairag. And Raja Parthariji also actually meets Guru Nanak Dev Ji later on, or there's a conversation between Raja Parthariji and Guru Nanak Dev Ji that appears in Itihas and Sri Nanak Prakash. But anyway, in this state, to kind of sum up the story really quick, Das actually included the story as well in the writing of Prem Prakash, which is all about this loving relationship and detaching from the world. Raja Parthariji wrote actually this text, this Granth, which it was all about Kam, which was all about lust. He had seen that this entire world is all about lust. He said like the two things that you can get that will give you the most bliss in the world are liberation. So he does speak about the spiritual aspect, and lust. So he had said this and he wrote a book about this. And so imagine Maharaj, after writing such a book, this book became prachalat, meaning it became famous in the world, and people start to know about this. People are reading this. Maharaj then put him into this cycle, this roller coaster, for him to change this and be able to write another granth that proves that this is wrong. And then Maharaj, what ends up happening is there is the king. He was Bhartariji wrote this book on lust, but as a king, he was a very just king. People loved him as a king because he was a good guy, right? So there's these really poor people that did bhakti, right? They did a lot of they did tap. They did a lot of spiritual hardship, a lot of spiritual practice, and they received a phal out of it. A phal meaning a reward, and they received this thing called the amar phal. Amar phal is like this, this fruit of immortality, or like keeping someone as a youth for a longer period of time, meaning giving someone long life essentially with that. And so what they did, they gave this. They said, our king is such a just king. We want him to live forever, because the longer he lives, the longer these people will be at peace. The people meaning the subjects, right? So imagine if you had a great prime minister, a great president, a great king, whatever the situation may be, you would want them to be in power forever, because then that meant a longing of good, a prolonging of good times, right? Essentially, that's the intent behind it. And so they had thought, like, let's give it to King Parthariji because he's such a good king. And King Parthariji was so, you could say, he was very, very, very much in love with his wife, meaning he was like smitten, as they say, by his wife's form, her physical beauty, and he was so infatuated, like meaning that he couldn't see clearly, right? So obviously, it's good to have a good relationship with healthy relationship, again, healthy, not overly obsessive, with between a husband and wife. And so he had this situation where, like, you could say anything, but his wife was always like seen as a goddess to him, right? And there's one moment when these people gave him that Amar Fal, he said, why don't I give this to my wife? And so at the same time, while this is happening, his wife had said, like, your brother had tried to cheat on me, right? But the king's brother had said, no, she tried to seduce me, right? And so the reality was the queen did try to seduce the king's brother, but the king couldn't believe his brother, but believed his wife, because he was overly trusting towards her, meaning like he could never ever put a finger of doubt on her. That's how much he loved her, right? Obsessively, to a point where, like, even when she did cheat on him, he didn't like say like, oh, he didn't even think about it twice. He's like, oh, my brother, my blood brother can go to exile, I don't care, but my wife is going to stay, right? He didn't even challenge it. He didn't think about it twice. He's just like, no, this is not possible. So what's happening, he gives that Amar Fal to his wife, and his wife is actually cheating on him with a kasai, not kasai, with someone who takes care of horses and cuts the grass, right? I don't know the term for a kasai, is someone who's a butcher, but yeah, so he's someone who is like the farmhand, you could say. So she's sleeping with the farmhand, and so she's so smitten by the farmhand, she gives him the Amarpal, that fruit of immortality, of youthliness. And he's like, okay, well, who do I really appreciate? He didn't want to eat it himself. He gives it to a prostitute. And the prostitute says, like, well, I don't want to continue this life, this type of work forever and all of my life. I want to be like, she's like, I'm ashamed of my task, but I'm only doing this because I'm now stuck in the situation. And so she gives that Amarfal then to the king. She says, my king is so great that he's so wonderful. I want him to live forever. Right. So she gives that Amarfal, that fruit of immortality, essentially, to the king. And the king's like, how did you get this? And so he follows back in like the line as to how it got to her. And he realizes, oh, the queen was cheating on me in this way. And so at that moment, his entire world just collapsed. And that king let go of all of his kingdom. He called his brother back, told him the kingdom is yours. He left it all. That moment was a point of Vairaag for him. And this comes up in multiple different granths, multiple different texts, within Sikh texts, within Hindu texts, within Buddhist texts, within multiple different spiritual texts, because it's such a powerful story, right? It did happen within India, and he became, from Raja Parthariji, he became Parthar Yogi. He became this yogi, which is a renunciate and an ascetic, right? And these conversations between Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Parthar Yogi are also explained later on. So that event gave him, it's called Karan Vairag. Sometimes we become detached because of an event that had happened. That event causes then us to become detached, right? And that's what happened with him. He couldn't see any peace anymore in lust, because the lust was the thing that gave him pain. His expectations were broken, right? That's what ends up happening with us. The things we look as pillars in our life, meaning that we lean on to be support of our mind, of our well-being, as our security, when they collapse, that's when we feel this detachment and we feel away from this world. So in this state, this is just an example of Guru Maharaj's Shabad, because there's a Shabad that comes in Gurbani speaking about the conversation between Guru Nanak Dev Ji and Parthar Yogi. And so this doesn't necessarily have to relate directly to what we're speaking about, but I just thought I'd share it in case you're reading Gurbani and you stumble upon the Shabad. Maharaj is telling the yogis, they're telling Parthar Yogi, whose spiritual leader was Gorakhnath at the time, and Gorakhnath had fell at the feet of Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj, so he had made Guru Nanak Dev Ji his guru then, right? But there's still people still following that Nath Yogi type of way. But Guru Sahib had like taken them away from that and showed them the proper path of living, right? So they're saying that through Hatha Yoga, through Kriya Yoga, meaning through putting your body through physical difficulties and things like that, or like making sure, like focusing on your physical breaths and holding those and that type of stuff, that this wasn't going to help you on a spiritual term in a long process, right? Because some people could hold their breaths and prolong their life in this way, or stay very physically healthy, right? But this Maharaj is saying, transcend that. It doesn't matter if you live 1,000 years or 100 years, if you don't focus on the divine love, that divine loving relationship, and you don't contemplate upon the real Vaheguru, then right? Your entire world is just gone. It's pointless, right? So they're saying, Singhi Sabda Sadatun Soha, Ehanis Pura Nadan, Pad Vichar Gyan Mat, Danda Vartaman Paputan, हर कीरत रह रास हमारी गुरमुख पंथ अतीतम सगली जोत हमारी समया नाना वर्ण अनेकम कहो नानक सुन परथर योगी पार ब्रह्म लिव एकम. So Maharaj is explaining all these things that are, what they're doing is they're taking the person that is a yogi and the things that yogis usually have. Like the yogis, Maharaj even refers to these in Japji Sahib as well. They're taking their mind that are usually attached to these physical things, like Gorakhnath yogis have like their ears pierced. They wear like very simple, like not even clothing, like just a huge, like really thick, like cloth that's really hard and coarse to wear. They carry a Vairaag, which means like Vairaag is different than what we're referring to Vairaag here, which is like a leaning type of thing to kind of lean on and do your tapasya in that way, right? They would draw their attention in a certain way so that their mind would be focused on transcending the body and the mind in this way, but then attaching itself to something greater, right? So Maharaj isn't saying, oh, the word yoga is a bad thing, but use it in a way that you're connecting to Parameswar Vaheguru through this divine love, right? Regardless of whatever state your body is in, Just continue to focus on that. So that's what Maharaj is saying. Kaho Nanak sun par jogi par Brahman live ekam. That don't worry about the physical body and that type of things and controlling and I guess manipulating your body in a certain way, wearing certain clothes and doing all that. Rather, focus on making your concentration on the real Vaheguru, right? And that's the Upadesh, the teaching that Maharaj gave to them. Anyway, so these are just heading towards the end here. There's multiple aspects of Vairag, and you might not be able to kind of just understand them immediately, right? And so again, what exactly is it? It's a sense of dispassion. So passion is like strong feelings towards something. Dispassion is kind of like a disinterest, detachment, separation. So in a way, like you're no longer finding peace within the things that you used to, right? And you're at a state where you're detached from the world. Your mind is kind of blank, right? In that blankness, you can continually go into the suffering, saying like, "Why is my mind blank? Why am I hurting?" And these types of things. Or you can use that as a space, as an atmosphere, an environment to do meditation, to do this connection, to do that dhyan of Vaheguru, right? There's feelings of this in this state. There's a feeling of longing and yearning. People often in the state of detachment, there's crying. There's crying for the physical suffering or like the physical pain or like the expectations being broken. But there's also this longing for something that it feels like it's an ancient pain, a pain that's existed for so long. And that void can only really be filled by this divine connection. You can people often when they go into this Vairag, they start to drink, they start to take drugs, they start to do these things. But to be honest, they just binge themselves into these ways and they're still not reaching anywhere. They're still not fulfilled. And so there's tears and crying associated with it, right? And these aren't bad things, right? This is actually, like they say, growing pains. These are growing pains of spirituality. Maharaj says in the Tisri Lav, remember the 4 Lavan that Maharaj talks about isn't necessarily limited to marriage. It's actually a spiritual teaching that's happening, saying that there's these 4 stages that you're going through in your life. The 3rd stage is Vairag. And so this is something that many people overlook, but this is absolutely required in your life. So if you haven't gone through this, then beg for this. When you do go through this, don't feel scared. Don't feel like, oh man, like now my life is horrible, or like you don't have any answers to this. There's a reason why it's precisely happening, right? There's a feeling of emptiness, and the emptiness is not an emptiness of like there is sorrow and stuff attached to it, but what it is the emptiness for you to put the truth of Vaheguru inside, the truth of spirituality inside, to fill that place with the eternal love, not a temporary love anymore, not a temporary pleasure, the sadasuk, the eternal peace. And then you'll feel truly fulfilled. And there's many Gursikhs that have gone through this, and there is many that will go on forever like this. Until this world exists, this is the path of Sikhi, this is the path of spirituality, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Hindu, people will go through these phases and they'll break off from the world. They'll go away from these discussions of, oh, you're better than me, I'm better than you, my hockey team is better than yours, my baseball team is better than yours, my football team is better than yours, in these types of ways. Those things are attached to identity, and they go into the state of, this doesn't make me feel this divine connection, and I'm detached from it. They no longer look to go to parties and things like that because they honestly don't have a feeling for those anymore. They have transcended them through this Vairag. And Das can personally say that I've gone through parts of this. I hope I'm still walking on this path where I reach that union and receive that Brahm Gyan Maharaj Kripa that happens, and I'm hoping that all of us do this and this life is fulfilling. But there's many places where we'll slowly start to get detached from. And it's not to turn away from those, but accept them, and you'll be a lot more happy on this and finding that they have a purpose to them, right? What you're doing in this is like sometimes you may feel helpless, but what this is you're breaking up from this physical world, right? This physical world is like, there's some songs that you'll hear in Punjabi songs like, hey on jaan waleya, that you're only a traveler in this world. Duniya chauk dina da mela. This entire world is just a fair, right? Like if a fair, or like you say an amusement park that comes through your town for about 4 days, like a festival, and then that festival is over, right? So it's better for you to accept that than to continually tell yourself lies and continually to try and keep that entire fair like standing there as long as you can. That's not possible. It's better for you to accept that reality and connect to that eternal peace. Nathan, even if you do continue to do that, you're going to come only in cycles and cycles again and again until you finally surrender yourself, right? So you may say like, well, I don't understand this, I don't do this, whatever. But sooner or later, whether you understand it or not, It's going to be coming into your life, and whether it's this physical human life or another life, until you reach that state of union. So it's better to kind of accept that now and be like, yeah, this is the life that I'm going to, connect with Maharaj. I don't want to take another birth. That why would I want to come back into this world? And use those times when, say, your expectations are not met from a person, your expectations are not met of an experience, traveling to a certain part of the world, we may have expectations, even spouses, all these things. And instead of getting sad, use those ways like, oh man, like, no, what do I attach my mind to next? No. Don't worry for something to fill that void that's going to be temporary. Don't look for more bandages to slap on. Look for that eternal thing, right? Make use of that Vairaag, right? Like Maharaj, we had that Shabad last week. That kirtan we heard last week. Like, how can I calm down this heart? That when I meet my partner, my spouse, my beloved, Waheguru, that's how I make this heart calm. How do I take my mind from out of this sorrowfulness, out of this sorrow? You can attach to pleasures again, but you're only going to be back in the same place you were again and again until you attach to that permanent state. So until you attach yourself to that divine beloved, you're going to come back over and over again, right? So that Vairag filled kirtan will help you really make you feel those feelings become purposeful. They start to have a reason why they're there. Even that Shabad that we had earlier on, the Das had put on SoundCloud. I think it was, yeah, man na rahe kaise milo pyare. My mind can't remain, meaning my mind is not in a state of peace. How am I supposed to meet my beloved? Right? It's like turning the mind away from the worldly pains and trying to look for peace within them and saying like, okay, my mind is in a bad state. Let me connect it to my beloved. And many people connect through kirtan in this way, right? Sometimes it's a sakhi that you hear. Like we shared a couple of sakhis today that bring our mind and into a state of realization and accept that surrendering, right? Sometimes it's a state of a sajpar. You may sit down, even this is both Nam Simran and reciting Gurbani. In the first moment, your mind might be wandering all over the place. And you might be sitting in Nam Simran and it may not click in. All your mind is events and all the things that are on your mind are keep plowing through. They're just going all over. They're making you restless, right? Keep pushing, right? At one point, the mind will calm down. The thoughts will start to slow down and they'll start to get pushed aside. And then what ends up happening? This emptiness starts to come in. And in the emptiness, then you start to feel the presence of Waheguru that is with us right now as we speak. Regardless of where we are in the world, Waheguru Hornaviya, whether I recognize it or not, Waheguru is here. Let me see that. I've heard that you're nearby, but let me see it, Maharaj. And you're even doing Ardasan. There's all this entire system of Sikhi is so perfect. If every single mood that you're having, whether you're in these pleasures of the world or pains of the world, whether you're in this deep, deep rock bottom, Maharaj is showing you a way to connect. Whether you're in a state of utmost happiness, then there's points of remembrance there as well. And that Nam Simran, even Sajpar, you might say like, oh, I read like one Anga Gurbani, I read one, beautiful, folio, one page. Maharaj, we don't say pages, we say Ang, but just to explain that, we read that and we say like, oh, I can't focus. Keep reading it. By the time you get to 20 Angs, then it's going to be like your mind is like in bliss. Your mind's no longer connected to the world. Your mind's just focusing on that Shabad. And all these Shabads start to come that give you more encouragement. They give you more hausala, as we would say. And the same with Nam Simran. When it first starts off, the mind's wandering. Once you reach the states where that's why they say, why, like people may say like, oh, what, like, why do I have to do Simran for like an hour? After say an hour of saying like Waheguru like thousands and thousands of times, then there's eventually a point where the mind starts to calm down and you're able to actually focus on the real, right? There's a reason why we have all this. And then if you're doing it regularly, routinely, then it'll take you less time to reach those states of connection. Your mind is more easily able to go into those states. And then that connection is there 24/7. Meaning if you start your day off with that Nam Simran or listening to the Shabad or doing Sajpart, all these things, then that feeling stays with you the rest of the day. Whether you're walking in the world, you go all these places, then you're in that Chalda Firda Samadhi, you're in that walking, talking, eternal peace, because your mind is internally balanced. And even wherever you walk, you're detached from it, right? Again, that's the state that we want to reach. That's Saj Avastha as it's described in Gurbani. And so again, this Vairag is purposeful. Again, many people who get detached from the world, they may go into an unhealthy state where they're they'll sit in this state of, because what ends up happening is you don't feel like doing anything of the world, right? But that feeling like not doing anything, you should instead be replacing that with Gurbani and Naam Simran and Katha, and doing that, because it allows you to not do anything else and allows your mind to attach and focus more clearly and more better, because it's already turned away from the rest of the world. So there's all of these are purposeful. If you don't use that, then it's only going to turn into a negative cycle. People go into deep states of depression because they don't know what to do with this. So again, everything has its purpose here, but when it's not used, it can turn into something really bad, right? So again, this is where we'll yeah, so to end this off, the last sort of part, there's multiple ways of understanding Vairag. There's three examples that are given. One is called Gada Vairag, meaning the Vairag of a donkey. This is using examples as a way for us to understand. Gada Vairag is like a donkey. What is the nature of a donkey? Donkeys are moaning and whining all day. They're just, if you ever hear a donkey goes, right? So you hear that, and the donkey just whining. It's just the nature. That's just how the donkey sounds like. So people who just, like, you could say they turn into, like, they're always like pissing and moaning about their problems, but then they go back into the world and they're stuck in these states all over again, meaning they detach themselves for a second, for like a day or two, but then they go back into the world, right? This is like a very basic level of Vairag. Most people go through this state. Then there's a state of Koda Vairag, meaning the Vairag of a horse, the detachment of a horse. A horse can wander for days and days and days, weeks upon weeks, but then eventually what ends up happening, meaning it's like people can be detached for months upon months, but then that horse always comes back home, meaning the mind always starts going back into the states that it was wavering in. So it's not necessarily that, like, oh, you're this and you're that, but we slowly start to see ourselves progress, where we used to be that person that is always whining and moaning and not able to really understand our suffering and how to deal with it and things like that. But then we go into longer states of detachment, where we're able to detach for a long time, although sometimes our minds may go back to the world and the worldly troubles, that we're still able to sustain something, right, where our mind is concentrated, and then eventually goes to a point of Sher Vairag, of the Vairag of a lion. And it's saying that the state where it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, whatever, the lion will stay unique and distinct, and they'll always be detached, right? And this speaks so principally for the role of a Sikh in the physical aspect. That's why we're referred to as Singhs. That's why Guru Sahib had referred to us as Singhs, as these lions. We're meant to stand out spiritually, but also politically as well, right? So spiritually, look at the person going through Vairag. They're not going to walk the path of the world. They're not going to go through the same state. Doesn't necessarily just have to go for Sikhs. Even someone who is a Hindu that goes through Vairag, they're no longer caring about what's happening in the world, the political situation, whatever. Whether you're a Christian, Muslim, whatever, their main thing is, I'm detached from the world. All I care is about my divine beloved and my relationship, and whether this life is going to be used well or not. That's the state, the Sher Vairag, that those sadhus, those saints, they go into, and there's no way that they'll go back into society and falter and go back into that state, right? And for a Singh specifically, we're able to do that when we let go of our ego and stand up for that which is wrong, and able to help those people so they can both spiritually attach to these same states, but also physically be in a good state where they're in a good environment that can open themselves up to spirituality. Those people who are worrying about their life and death situations, or are having attacks on their spiritual and religious systems, they can't be in a state where they can go into into spiritual states, because there's a lot of challenges that are up against them to begin with. So again, this Vairag touches upon so many different aspects. So again, Das will end this on the recording section here. We'll go into discussion. So please forgive any mistakes. And do forgive any mistakes that we make. Hopefully this is helpful. We're going to have one more session. The next two readings, they're relatively short, so I've combined them together. We're going to wrap up this Granth, and hopefully we're able to really develop a new way of seeing the world, and kind of let go of these misperceptions, meaning the wrong way of seeing the world as we have developed due to our surroundings over time. And so hopefully we're encouraged to read Gurbani more, spend more times of our days in spiritual reflection and in spiritual practice. So again, Inniya Beintiyan, just these are like the requests that I have. Please forgive any mistakes that I have made. I know I've made a lot. Treat me as like an innocent child that doesn't know much. I'm just trying to speak, from what little knowledge that I have. And may Maharaj connect us in this way over and over again, and connect us to the Sadh Sangat, who always connect and use their time towards developing and building themselves spiritually, and to the charan of Guru Maharaj, connecting to the feet of Guru Sahib. Inniyan bentiyan, Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh.